You wake up in the morning and the ocean beckons. There is nothing like the call to wander down to the beach. The path takes you through dense coastal forests, with spiraling branches overhead dappling the sunlight, and the ground beneath you becomes increasingly sandy. Once you're through, you find yourself at the top of a sand dune. It's a gradual slope with small green shrubs and broken shells. Just a short stretch further and you're on the beach and onto the rocks, ready to enjoy a day of fun activities. What you may not realize is that you've just crossed 3 different but interlinked ecosystems. They are the coastal forests, the rocky shores, and the sandy shores. These ecosystems consist of a variety of organisms and food networks. Without them, there would be no trees, no dune vegetation, and no small sea life in the rocks. They are fundamental to the life on our coastlines. Today, we are going to focus on 2 of these ecosystems, the rocky shores and the sandy shores.
There is so much to be discovered by just walking along the beach, seeing what you can find, and understanding its role in the greater food web. My name is Enati, and I'm going to show you how wonderfully diverse and intricate our beachfront ecosystems are.
An ecosystem is a biological community of organisms interacting with their physical environment. Plankton, seaweed, animals, and bacteria all form part of an intricate food web. Let us start by looking at what makes up sandy shores. Sandy shores are made up of grains of sand, crushed shells, and some rocks. The sand is in a constant state of flux, being continually moved and lifted by the waves and the wind. Eventually, piles of sand, known as coastal sand dunes, form on the beachfront. Sand dunes are part of sandy shores, and they are important to this ecosystem.
Sand dunes can be small, or they can be huge mountains of sand.
These sand dunes often have grass, shrubs, and other coastal vegetation, which bind the sand particles and strengthen dunes, helping to prevent further land erosion. If you look carefully, you may find tiny animals and insects burrowing and living in the sand. This way, they are better protected from waves, predators, and constant sand movements. On the sandy shores closer to the sea, there is a collection of all sorts of marine artifacts. This is because the sea, especially after a mighty storm, will wash up anything that has been churned up by the wind and waves. It can be fascinating to walk along the water's edge on an early morning after a big storm and look closely at what has been washed up. Not only can you find beautiful shells and seaweeds, but also all kinds of marine debris that shed so much light on our oceans.
Let's take a walk along the sandy shores and see what interesting things we can find. Oh, here's some seaweed. This is seaweed which has been detached from the rocks or reefs out at sea and washed up by the waves.
There are many different kinds of seaweed and algae, and can be found in many habitats at varying depths, and help provide food and shelter for animals.
Most people walk along the beach to find shells like this. Just look at how beautiful this shell is.
But let's not let the exquisite shapes and colours make us forget the function of these shells. Would you be surprised to know that tiny sea creatures such as hermit crabs or snails live in these shells? They use them as a protective cover, which protects them from predators.
Did you know that in some parts of the world, like the Solomon Islands, you have to be very careful when you're picking up shells because there may be deadly creatures inside which may sting you if you're not very careful.
Luckily, there are not too many of these on our South African shores.
This is a shell of a chiton. To make it easier for you to spot, you will notice that it is divided up into valves. This surrounding area is called the girdle, and this is what holds the valves together.
Chitons are sluggish species that feed on algae. Most chitons are herbivores and live on algae they scratch off from the rocks and mussels.
Come, have a look at this. This is a mermaid's purse, which has been washed up by the sea. It may look like another piece of seaweed, but believe it or not, it actually comes from a shark.
Many other things can be found that come from creatures in the sea, if you know what to look for.
This is a cuttlebone, and they are scattered all over the beach. They come from cuttlefish, which live out at sea.
The cuttlebone allows the cuttlefish to be able to swim freely from the bottom of the ocean to the top.
These are some of the common things that are found in the sandy shores. Remember, it is not only about the washed up, discarded debris in the sand, but a whole food web of living creatures that make up this ecosystem.
Now let's move on to the rocky shores, which comprise of a larger portion of our coastline. Not only can they be exquisite scenery, but they house complex and interlinked food webs. Many of the animal and plant species are tidal dependent. This means they are able to live in the open air when tides are very low and wait until the tide rises again and they are covered in water. You generally find two types of animals living on the rocks. Let's take a look at each of these types. Mobile animals mean exactly that. They are mobile and can move around. This includes fishes, starfish, crabs, and sea snails, which can move up and down with the tides. Fixed or sedentary animals, like mussels and oysters, are firmly attached to the rocks. Water flows through them, and they have sieves that filter the water and capture bacteria, algae, and other fine particles, which provide them with nutrition. Mussels will filter up to 300 litres in a day. The rock pools are full of life. You may find an octopus living quietly in a crevice, waiting to prey on the next unsuspecting fish, or a starfish attached to a rock in the shallows. There are many lovely kinds of fish that can be found, from the small gobies in the pools to a shoal of blacktail roaming around. You may even find beautiful tropical fish. This is why snorkeling can be such fun.
Now let's walk along the rocky shores and learn more about some of the species that make up this ecosystem. These are limpets, and they are a different group of sea snails and freshwater snails. As you can see, each limpet has a spot on the rock that it returns to at low tide. This is a particular spot that its shell has grown a perfect fit for.
What makes them clever animals is that they leave a trail of mucus behind them. This helps them to know the direction from which they came. Also, keep an eye out for some of the fantastic corals living in the rocks. Corals are living, breathing, feeding, reproducing organisms, which play a fundamental role to life on the reefs. Colourful sea urchins are other interesting species to look out for. These have long, pointy spikes that protect them from predators.
Here in the deeper pools, you might find crayfish, also known as the East Coast rock lobster. At nighttime, they feed on mussels and limpets. If you are out snorkeling, look out for the little antenna poking out from the small crevices in between the rocks.
This is a crab. They are usually found scuttling all over the rocks.
Crabs are very helpful because they help to clean the sea bottom by harvesting decomposing plant and animal matter.
But it's not only the underwater sea life to look out for. Birds get a lot of their food from what we can find on rocky shores. There are many species to look out for. Oyster catchers will often be seen in pairs. This is because the mate they choose is their lifelong partner. Sandpipers are small and speedy, and their little legs can take them away from danger at a surprising speed. Seagulls are perhaps the most common and will often be found on the rocky shores. So now we know about just a few of the species that can be found in these two ecosystems. But what is important to understand is that each animal does not live independent lives. They rely completely on the abundance of other species for their food and energy. All organisms, whether dead or alive, are potential sources of food for other organisms.
Ecosystems consist of food chains and food webs, which shows how energy is transferred from one species to another in a never-ending cycle that sustains life.
One way of understanding how energy is transferred is through food pyramids that comprise trophic levels. At the bottom you have the producers, who generate food through photosynthesis. These are the seaweeds, algae and plankton. These become the food for the primary consumers, which are herbivores like sea urchins, limpets, periwinkles and fish. Above this are the secondary consumers, which are the omnivores and carnivores, including octopus, starfish, birds and bigger fish. And at the very top are the tertiary consumers, which are the large predators like sharks and dolphins. This trophic level also includes human beings, the deadliest predator of all. And of course one must not forget the decomposers, who play an important role transferring the energy from dead matter back into the cycle. Food chains show a linear transfer of energy, from producer to herbivore to carnivores and back through decomposers and filter feeders. But of course sometimes animals' feeding habits are more complex, and food chains become food webs, linking all the organisms in a grand cycle of energy. You can see how each and every single species plays a fundamental role to the functioning of the system.
This is a delicate system. Everything you see, from the tiniest limpet to the biggest predator fish, is all in balance. Without one of these, this food system would not function.
There are many threats to the ecosystem, and unfortunately, most are human-related. Pollution and human waste carried down rivers and into the sea is slowly destroying our coastline. It can include chemical effluent, sewage and litter. Beach activities can also be threatening. Vehicles on the beach compact the sand and destroy small burrows and nests. On the rocky shores, over-harvesting of marine life by not keeping to the legal limits and using poor harvesting methods is slowly stripping the life from our coastline. And the ever-encroaching urban development is perhaps the greatest threat to the survival of these fragile ecosystems. Our sand and rocky shores are part of the splendour of our coastline. It is home to hundreds of different species who are all interlinked in a constant flow of energy, which sustains life on this planet. Without these ecosystems, our coastline would be a barren wasteland, devoid of the beauty and diversity we are fortunate to have today. So let's do everything we can to protect it. Take part in beach cleanups, use proper harvesting methods, and stick to fishing regulations. And most importantly, take the time to appreciate and learn about everything that makes up these incredible ecosystems.
So the next time you wander down to the beach and swim in the little rock pools, remember to understand and appreciate every organism you come across and understand its important role in the greater food web.